The topic of discussion for this presentation is, must an export oriented business register voluntarily for GST to claim back the input side GST? Or do they have any other options to operate or reduce the impact of GST without voluntarily registering for GST? So let's move on to the next slide and first understand what we are talking, which scenario we are referring to. So why export oriented businesses need to register voluntarily for GST? So this is a map of Singapore, and let's say that as shown here, you primarily export out of Singapore, but you are either procuring goods locally in Singapore or you are importing goods into Singapore. Now when you procure goods locally in Singapore, you will have to pay 7% GST on that procurement, which you will be paying it to your supplier. Or when you import goods into Singapore, you will have to pay additional 7% at the time of import to government authorities by way of GST. So either of the route you procure the goods, you are paying GST, and when you export, you are not actually collecting any GST. So what happens is, because of this scenario, you don't have to register for GST, because on export side you don't have liability to register for GST. But when this happens, the 7% GST paid on input side becomes your cost and you cannot recover it back. So the only way to recover that cost is register voluntarily to claim this input side GST. So the question of this presentation is voluntary registration the only option? Can GST impact be lessened without GST registration also? So what happens is, many businesses which are promoted by foreigners operate out of Singapore, and they have this kind of export import model. And what happens is, for first few years the volume of transactions in those businesses tend to be quite low. So in that circumstances, voluntarily registering and taking up the responsibility of that additional record maintenance and quarterly reporting can be cumbersome for the small businesses. So what are the options? So there are two options, there are two models where you need not really register voluntarily for GST and still avoid that cost impact. Option number one, if you are importing the goods into Singapore for re-export purpose, then import it into bonded warehouse. So normally when you import goods, customs in Singapore will charge 7% GST, but if you are importing it into bonded warehouse, so there are 9 bonded warehouse areas or 9 trade free zones, what we call, where you can import those goods, and when you import those, customs will not apply any GST on it. And then in that bonded warehouse, you can carry out whatever additional activities you need to do. For example, you might want to repackage it, which is a common scenario, relabel it so that the original source is not known, and then you can export it overseas. So in this scenario, when the goods are in bonded warehouse, GST is not applied, and if you export from bonded warehouse itself, then the GST will never come into picture. The second scenario that I'm speaking here is, ask supplier to ship to overseas. So in this case, you are procuring locally, and you can ask the person or the supplier from whom you are procuring to directly ship the goods to overseas location, that is your to customer's address. So ship to address can be your customer address, and bill to can be done to your company, and then your company will bill to ultimate customer. In this case, since the shipping address is to an overseas location, even if billing is done to a Singapore registered entity, the supplier is allowed to charge 0% GST. However, one downside of this model is that your ultimate customer will come to know about the source of your procurement. So as I said, if supplier ships to overseas address, supplier can apply 0% GST. So in summary, you still have few options to manage your export business and not voluntarily register for GST. Check this out and decide what works best for you.
Thank you for watching this video. This video was brought to you by Epica Consulting Singapore. Subscribe to our channel today to get notified when new videos are posted.